"Get off my property before I call the police!" James Miller's shout echoed across his wheat field as Karen Winters, the town council president, stormed through his crops with garden shears in hand. Her expensive white pantsuit stood out against the golden wheat like a vulture in a field of prey. She wasn't here to talk. She was here to take. "This is community property now," Karen sneered, cutting down a handful of wheat. "Your selfish days of hoarding food are over." What this entitled politician didn't know was that she'd just declared war on a man who'd spent every penny he had building this farm from dead soil. A man who'd buried his wife here. A man who was about to show this whole corrupt town exactly what happens when you try to steal another man's livelihood. This isn't just a story about crops. This is about how one power-drunk politician's greed exposed a web of corruption that would tear a small town apart. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 6 months before Karen's intrusion, James Miller stood in his kitchen at dawn, staring at the mortgage payment notice. 5 years of back-breaking work had transformed this worthless plot into 200 acres of rich, organic soil. Every penny he'd saved working construction had gone into the irrigation systems. Every spare moment had been spent learning about crop rotation and soil chemistry. This wasn't just land, it was his life's work. The local farmers had laughed when he bought Old Thompson's place. The soil was dead, poisoned by decades of chemical farming. Might as well try growing crops on concrete, they'd said. But they didn't know about Mary, his late wife, and her dream of organic farming. They didn't know about the promise he'd made at her grave. The first year nearly broke him. 18-hour days, endless soil treatments, and countless failures. He'd sleep in the barn some nights, too exhausted to make it back to the house. The bank threatened foreclosure twice. But slowly, the soil came back to life. Now his wheat fields stretched golden to the horizon. His vegetable gardens produced more than the local market could handle. The same farmers who'd laughed now came asking for advice. His organic certification hung proudly in the kitchen, next to Mary's picture. But success brought attention. Karen Winters and her crowd from the new luxury developments started showing up at his market stall, commenting on his duty to the community. They'd moved to Millbrook for the rural atmosphere, but brought their city attitudes with them. To them, his farm wasn't the result of sweat and sacrifice. It was a quaint amenity that should be shared. Last week, Karen had cornered him at the market. "The council is discussing ways to make local food more accessible," she'd said, her smile not reaching her eyes. "We're thinking of implementing a community harvest program. Neighbors helping neighbors." James had seen right through it. "Neighbors help by asking, not taking," he'd replied. "This isn't a community garden." Her smile had hardened. "Times are changing, Mr. Miller. Modern communities have different needs. Those who don't adapt get left behind." Now, watching the sun rise over his fields, James felt a deep unease. He'd heard rumors about Karen's urban renewal projects in her previous town, about small businesses and farms mysteriously failing after refusing to cooperate with local authorities. The mortgage notice seemed to burn in his hand. One missed payment and the vultures would circle. But he hadn't spent 5 years bringing this land back to life, just to watch it be carved up by entitled politicians. Mary had always said he was too stubborn for his own good. Maybe she was right. But some things were worth fighting for. His phone buzzed. A message from Tom Edwards, his neighbor to the north. "Watch out! Council meeting tonight. Karen's got something big planned." James folded the mortgage notice and tucked it away. Whatever Karen was plotting, she'd picked the wrong farmer to bully. This land wasn't just soil and crops. It was blood, and sweat and promises kept, and he'd die before he'd let anyone take it from him. The Millbrook Town Council met in an old brick building that had once been the schoolhouse. Tonight, every seat was filled. Karen Winters sat at the center of the raised platform, her white blazer pristine under the fluorescent lights. 5 years ago, she'd moved from Boston with promises of preserving rural charm. Now she ran the town like her personal fiefdom. Property values have doubled since I took office, she often reminded people. What she didn't mention were the family businesses that had mysteriously closed after opposing her modernization plans, or the 3 small farms that had sold to developers after sudden tax reassessments. James sat in the back row, next to Tom Edwards. Tom's farm shared a boundary with his, and they'd helped each other through tough harvests. "She's been meeting with Riverside Development," Tom whispered. "Same company that built those luxury condos in Hartfield." The meeting started with routine matters: road repairs, school funding, the usual small-town concerns. But Karen's smile grew sharper when she reached the final agenda item: Community Resource Management Initiative. "Millbrook is changing," she announced, standing to address the crowd. "Our new residents expect certain amenities. Access to local, organic produce shouldn't be limited by outdated notions of private farming." James felt his jaw tighten. In the tea row ahead, he recognized several faces from the luxury developments, Karen's core supporters. They'd moved here for the rural lifestyle, but complained about tractor noise and the smell of manure. "We're proposing a voluntary program," Karen continued, emphasis on voluntary. Local farms would open their fields for community harvest days, share their bounty with neighbors. Those who participate would receive property tax incentives. The room erupted in murmurs. James noticed how many of the old farming families were absent. They'd stopped coming to meetings months ago, tired of being outvoted by Karen's block. "What about labor costs?" someone asked. "Insurance liability?" Karen waved away the concerns. "The council will handle details. This is about community spirit, supporting local agriculture." "You mean taking what isn't yours?" James spoke up, his voice cutting through the chatter. Heads turned. Karen's smile flickered. "Mr. Miller," she said smoothly, "always the individualist. This program would benefit you most of all. You're organic. Certification makes your produce very desirable." The threat was subtle but clear. James stood addressing the room. "My farm isn't a petting zoo for weekend warriors. You want organic produce? Buy it at market price like everyone else." "Nobody's forcing participation," Karen replied, but her eyes were cold. "Though non-participating farms might find their tax assessments need updating." The room temperature seemed to drop. James looked around at the faces, some sympathetic, some hostile, most carefully neutral. This wasn't just about harvesting rights. This was a power play, and everyone knew it. "Meeting adjourned," Karen announced brightly. But as James left, he caught her watching him with the calculating look of a predator sizing up prey. The war for Millbrook's soul was about to begin, and his farm was ground zero. The morning after the council meeting, James found his mailbox stuffed with papers: property tax reassessment notices, zoning compliance reviews, agricultural permit renewal forms, each one marked urgent, each one requiring expensive inspections. "And fees. It's already starting," Tom Edwards said, leaning on the fence between their properties. His weathered face looked older than usual. "Got my own stack this morning. Karen doesn't waste time." James spread the papers on his kitchen table, next to Mary's photo. The total fees would eat half his expected harvest profits. "She's trying to bleed us out." "Philip's farm got the same treatment last year," Tom continued. "Now it's a construction site for luxury homes. Riverside Development bought it for pennies on the dollar after the tax bills hit." The sound of expensive cars on the gravel road drew their attention. 3 black SUVs rolled past, slowing near James's front gate. Karen sat in the passenger seat of the lead vehicle, her phone raised, taking pictures of his property. Documenting Oh, code violations, Tom spat. Did the same thing to old Johnson before his dairy farm mysteriously failed inspection. James watched the SUVs disappear around the bend. How many farms has she forced out? 7 in the last year, all bought by Riverside Development. Tom pulled out his phone, showing James a news article. Look who sits on their board of directors. Karen's smiling face appeared below the headline, Local Leader Brings Progress to Rural Communities. The article praised her work, modernizing small towns across 3 states. She's done this before, James realized. Move in, force out local farmers, flip the land to developers. And now she's got her sights on your organic certification, Tom added grimly. Premium land, perfect for those farm-to-table luxury communities she loves building. A truck from the county assessor's office pulled into James's driveway. The inspector stepped out, clipboard ready. Karen's signature clearly visible on the key authorization form. Better get back to my place, Tom said. Got my own inspection in an hour. Remember what Mary used to say about standing together? James nodded. His wife had always believed in the strength of community. Before cancer took her, she'd made him promise to protect not just their farm, but what it stood for. The afternoon brought more visitors, health inspectors, building code enforcement, each one apologetic but firm. Just following orders from the council. By sunset, James's kitchen table disappeared under violation notices and compliance orders. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from other farmers facing the same assault. Then came the email from his organic certification board. Emergency review required. Multiple complaints received regarding compliance issues. Karen was moving, faster than anyone expected. She wasn't just targeting his farm, she was trying to destroy everything he'd built, everything Mary had dreamed of. His phone buzzed again. A message from an unknown number. Riverside Development offering fair prices. Better sell now before things get worse. James deleted the message. Through his window, the setting sun painted his wheat fields gold, the same color as Mary's. Her hair had been. Some things weren't for sale. Some fights needed fighting. Tomorrow, Karen would learn exactly what happened when you pushed a farmer too far. But tonight, he had inspection reports to review and a community to rally. The real war was just beginning. The emergency council meeting was called on a Wednesday night. Every farmer in Millbrook packed the old schoolhouse, their trucks filling the parking lot. Karen's supporters from the luxury developments arrived in SUVs, parking on the manicured lawn to avoid the mud. Given recent compliance issues, Karen announced from her raised platform, the council is implementing immediate oversight of local agricultural operations. Her white suit gleamed under the fluorescent lights as she unveiled. A large map of Millbrook's farmland, red marks covered James's property. Miller Farm has failed 17 safety and compliance inspections in the past week. Clearly, private ownership is proving inadequate for maintaining community standards. The room erupted. Tom Edwards stood up. 17 inspections in a week? That's harassment and you know it. Karen's smile never wavered. The council is invoking emergency powers under Municipal Code 47.3. Effective immediately, all agricultural operations will be placed under temporary community management. James rose slowly, his voice cutting through the chaos. You're trying to seize private property without compensation. That's illegal. We're protecting public interests, Karen countered. Our inspectors found dangerous conditions. Contamination, risks, evidence of improper organic certification compliance. She gestured to a thick stack of reports. The council has a duty to act. Those reports are fake, and you know it, James challenged, just like the reports you used to seize farmland in Hartfield and Preston County. Karen's composure cracked for the first time. Be careful, Mr. Miller. Defamation has serious consequences. So does corruption. James pulled out his phone, playing a recording. Karen's voice filled the room. Push the inspections hard. Find violations. I don't care if you have to make them up. Riverside Development needs that land rezoned by summer. The color drained from Karen's face. Phones appeared throughout the room, recording her reaction. "This meeting is adjourned," she snapped. But nobody moved. 3 states, Karen, James continued. 7 towns, always the same pattern. Move in, abuse council power, force out farmers, sell to developers. But you picked the wrong town this time. "Security!" Karen shouted, but the local deputies stood still, their faces hard. Many had family farms of their own. "The FBI's real. Estate Fraud Division has copies of everything," James announced. "Every fake inspection, every rigged assessment, every backroom deal with Riverside Development." Karen lunged for her papers, but Tom was faster. He grabbed the stack of reports, distributing them through the crowd. Evidence of years of corruption spread through the room like wildfire. "This is your last warning." Karen's voice shook with rage. "Back down or lose everything." "No, Karen," James replied calmly. "That's your choice to make. Back down or we show everyone exactly how you've been operating." The room had gone completely silent. 2 decades of farming had taught James patience. Sometimes you had to wait for exactly the right moment to harvest. Tonight, Karen's corruption was ripe for exposure, and he'd just planted the seeds of her destruction. Dawn broke over Millbrook to find 3 police cars parked outside James's farm. Not local deputies, state police. Karen had called in favors claiming threats of violence at the council meeting. But she'd forgotten something crucial about small towns. Everybody talked. "My cousin works dispatch," Deputy Sarah Mitchell told James over coffee in his kitchen. "Those state boys, they're not here for you. FBI asked them to secure potential evidence." Through the window, James watched Karen's black SUV prowl past his gate for the 3rd time that morning. Her phone was pressed to her ear, face tight with rage. Emergency condemnation order blazed across the notice she'd had taped to his fence. Overnight, the same notice hung on every farm that had opposed her. But the papers shook in her hand when she'd posted them. Her power play was backfiring spectacularly. James's phone hadn't stopped buzzing since last night. Farmers from neighboring counties sharing similar stories about Karen's development. Schemes, journalists requesting comments, former town officials offering testimonies about bribes and threats. "She's in her office shredding documents," Tom reported, arriving with fresh intel. "But we got her, James. That recording about Riverside Development, 3 different news stations want it." Karen's response was swift and vicious. By noon, code enforcement officers swarmed every opposing farm. Health inspectors arrived with anonymous complaints. Tax assessors appeared with armed escorts. But something had changed. The fear was gone. "Get off my property," old Pete Johnson told the inspectors at his dairy farm. Neighbors filmed everything on their phones. "Unless you want to explain those." Fake reports to the FBI, James's Organic Certification Board called. They'd received documentation of Karen's fraudulent complaints. His certification wasn't just secure. They were investigating her for attempted fraud. Then came the email. From Riverside Development marked urgent. Distance ourselves from current situation. Terminating all local contracts. Reputational concerns. Karen's power base was crumbling, but cornered predators are the most dangerous. "You think this is over?" Her voice crackled through James's phone. "I've destroyed better men than you. By the time I'm done, there won't be a bank in 3 states that'll touch your mortgage. Difference is, Karen, we have proof. Every threat, every fake inspection, every bribe. Sure you want to push this?" Her laugh was cold. "You farmers are all the same, so focused on your precious land you can't see the bigger picture. I've got friends in the state capital, judges, regulators. How long can you fight when every government agency suddenly takes an interest in your operation?" "Long enough," James replied. "Question is, how long can you fight when everyone sees what you really are?" The line went dead. Minutes later, Tom called. "She's called an emergency council session for tonight, trying to push through some kind of agricultural emergency declaration." James looked out over his fields, golden wheat swaying in the breeze. Mary had always said some things were worth fighting for, no matter the cost. She'd also taught him that bullies only win when people stay silent. "Spread the word," he told Tom. "Tonight, we show everyone exactly how Karen Winters operates. No more shadows, no more threats. Time to drag all of it into the light." The war for Millbrook's soul had begun, but this time, the farmers weren't standing alone. The Millbrook Diner had served farmers for 50 years. Now its cramped booths overflowed with people signing Tom's petition. "Remove Karen Winters," read the header, followed by pages of documented violations and abuse of power. 300 signatures since breakfast, Sarah Mitchell reported, still in her deputy's uniform. She'd taken personal leave after refusing Karen's order to harass farmers. Even folks from the luxury developments are turning on her. James watched through the diner's window as another news van parked outside. Karen's corruption was becoming regional news, but her retaliation was getting worse. "Bank called this morning," Pete Johnson announced, sliding into the booth. "They're reviewing my loan. Karen's got friends at First National." His dairy farm had been in the family for generations. Now it might not survive the month. The diner's door chimed. Linda Chen from the grocery store rushed in, face flushed. "You need to see this." She handed James her tablet. On screen, Karen stood at a podium in the state capitol, tears in her eyes. "These attacks are politically motivated," she sobbed to reporters. "Local farmers, angry about necessary modernization, are spreading lies. My only crime was trying to bring prosperity to a dying town." The diner erupted in angry mutters. Everyone knew 3 local businesses had mysteriously burned down after refusing Karen's modernization plans. "That's not all," Linda continued. "She's filed lawsuits against everyone who signed the petition, claims we're part of a criminal conspiracy to defame her." James's phone buzzed. His lawyer. "Karen's got 2 state judges in her pocket," the message read. "They're fast-tracking her lawsuits. This could get expensive fast. She's trying to bankrupt us into submission." Tom growled. "Same thing she did in Preston County." But Preston County hadn't been ready. Millbrook was. Sarah pulled out her own tablet. "Remember that corruption investigation I told you about? FBI's been building a case against Karen for months. They just needed witnesses willing to testify. And now they've got an entire town." James finished. The diner's door chimed again. Everyone tensed as men in suits entered. But these weren't Karen's lawyers. Their FBI badges glinted in the fluorescent light. "Folks," the lead agent addressed the room, "we're here about Karen Winters. Who wants to go first?" Before anyone could speak, phones throughout the diner buzzed simultaneously. Breaking news. Karen had just pushed through an emergency order. All farms opposing her community harvest program would face immediate health and safety inspections. "Tomorrow morning," the text read. "Better have your papers in order." James stood, addressing the crowded diner. "Karen thinks she can beat us by dividing us, but she forgot something important. This isn't just about farms anymore. This is about our home." The FBI agents started taking statements. The petition filled more pages. Outside, news vans multiplied as Karen's story grew. But the real story wasn't about corruption or politics. It was about a community finally saying enough. "Mary would be proud," Tom said quietly, watching farmers. "And townspeople unite." This is what she meant about standing together. James nodded, remembering his wife's words. Sometimes the biggest harvests come from the seeds of resistance. The headline hit social media like a bomb. "Toxic chemicals found on local farms." Karen's counterattack began with a press release from a concerned citizens group. Actually, a shell company traced back to Riverside Development. James stared. at his phone in disbelief. The article claimed soil tests had revealed dangerous levels of prohibited pesticides on his organic farm. Similar allegations targeted every farmer who'd signed the petition. "It's everywhere," Tom reported grimly. His daughter worked in social media. Paid trolls are spreading it across every platform. "They're calling us environmental criminals." The Organic Certification Board called next. Despite knowing Karen's history, they had to investigate. Inspectors would arrive tomorrow. His premium contracts, the ones keeping the farm afloat, hung by a thread. Local news crews descended on Millbrook, filming hazmat-suited environmental experts taking soil samples. Not mentioned, these experts worked for companies connected to Karen's development projects. "She's trying to poison the jury pool," James's lawyer warned, "making us look like criminals before the lawsuits even start." The smear campaign hit hard. Grocery chains temporarily suspended contracts with accused farms. School boards cancelled local produce orders. Even loyal customers started asking questions. Sarah Mitchell arrived with worse news. "Karen's people are offering money for dirt." Real or invented? They're approaching farm workers, promising green cards or threatening deportation. James thought of Manuel, his best worker, who'd been with him since the beginning. Whose family depended on the farm? How much pressure would they face? The attack turned personal by nightfall. Anonymous posts appeared claiming James had suspicious insurance claims after Mary's death, that he'd mismanaged family farms before. Every lie crafted to paint him as untrustworthy. "They're going after everyone," Linda Chen reported. Her grocery store's health inspection had mysteriously failed. Creating so much smoke, people assume there's fire. But Karen had miscalculated. Small towns have long memories. Mary's oncologist called, furious about the insurance allegations. He'd treat their case pro bono during the lawsuits. The organic certification inspector turned out to be Tom's college roommate. No fan of corrupt politicians. Manuel showed up at dawn, eyes fierce. "They offered me money to lie," he announced. "I told them where to stick it. This farm gave my family a chance. We don't forget that." The FBI added witness tampering to their investigation. But Karen's media blitz had done damage. Doubt spread. Contracts remained suspended. Legal bills mounted. That's her real game, Tom realized. Doesn't matter if the allegations are false. Fighting them costs money we don't have. James walked his fields that evening, remembering Mary's battle with cancer. She'd never lost her dignity, even at the end, never let lies win. His phone buzzed, another attack article, but underneath, comments were turning. Local people sharing stories of Karen's corruption. Truth spreading like wheat shoots through spring soil. "She thinks mud sticks," James told Tom. "But we know something she doesn't. Real farmers aren't afraid to get their hands dirty fighting for what's right." The meeting happened after midnight in Pete Johnson's barn. Not just Millbrook farmers now. Faces from 3 counties crowded between hay bales and tractors. Each had their own Karen Winters story. She tried this in Hampton Falls. A weathered apple farmer reported. 3 farms went bankrupt fighting her allegations. Land got rezoned for condos a month later. "Same thing in Preston County," another added. "But she left paper trails. We've got proof of falsified environmental reports." James watched the crowd grow. Sarah Mitchell had quietly spread the word through a network of rural deputies. Linda Chen's grocery suppliers brought farmers from across the state. Even city folks showed up, journalists, lawyers, environmental activists. All drawn by Karen's a pattern of corruption. "Got something you need to see," Tom whispered, leading James to his truck. Inside, a laptop showed emails between Karen and Riverside Development. NT Guy at the council recovered these from the deleted folder. She's been planning this for years. The emails revealed everything. Targeted farms, fake violations, planned accidents. But the biggest bombshell was Karen's endgame. Millbrook wasn't just another land grab. It's a test case, Tom explained grimly. If they can break us, they'll roll this scheme out across the whole state. Industrial farms only, controlled by development corporations. A news van crept past the barn, Karen's latest media allies hunting for dirt. But they saw only darkness. The resistance had learned to move in shadows. Inside, farmers shared tactics, how to fight false inspections, which judges were honest, ways to protect workers from intimidation. Every failure in other towns became a lesson for Millbrook. Linda, Jen's son, a social media expert, showed them how to counter Karen's online attacks. Sarah Mitchell's police contacts helped track Karen's enforcers. Local bankers, disgusted by Karen's pressure tactics, quietly extended emergency credit lines. She thinks she's fighting just farmers, Pete Johnson observed, but she's up against a whole way of life. The organic certification board called late. James's case had been expedited. Karen's soil tests were proven fraudulent. His certification would stand. But victory came with warning. She's pushing for state-level emergency powers, Sarah reported, trying to override local authority, claims it's a public health crisis requiring immediate action. The barn grew quiet. State powers could bypass local resistance. Override, community support, force compliance through sheer bureaucratic weight. That's how she won before, the Hampton Falls farmer said quietly, too big to fight alone. James stood, addressing the gathered crowd. In the shadows of Pete's barn, he saw not just farmers, but a community fighting for survival. Mary had always said real strength grows from the ground up. Then we don't fight alone, he declared. Every farm, every town, every person she's ever bullied. Time to show Karen Winters what happens when people stand together. The resistance had found its roots. Now it would grow. State inspectors arrived at dawn in hazmat suits, a news crew conveniently waiting. Karen stood by her SUV, watching with barely concealed satisfaction as they approached James's farm. But her smile faded when she saw who waited at the gate. Not just James. 50 people formed a human chain across his driveway. Farmers, townspeople, and something Karen hadn't expected. 3 environmental lawyers and an independent testing lab, all pro bono. We'll be documenting everything, one lawyer announced loudly for the cameras. Every sample, every test, every procedure. No room for creative interpretations. Karen's hand tightened on her phone. This wasn't supposed to be public. Her inspectors worked best without oversight. Mr. Miller's farm has been randomly selected. She began, like the 7 other farms that opposed you, Sarah Mitchell cut in, smartphone recording everything. Interesting definition of random. The inspection became a circus. Every time Karen's team discovered a violation, independent experts were there to challenge it. When they claimed to find pesticide traces, the lab ran parallel tests. Each false allegation met immediate documented refutation. Soil sample from Sector 3 shows dangerous levels, an inspector started. That's not Sector 3, Manuel interrupted. You're testing the public road. Farm boundaries 10 feet north. Check the property maps. The news crew looked increasingly uncomfortable. This wasn't the damning exposé Karen had promised them. These delays are obstruction, Karen snapped. We have state authority to conduct legitimate inspections, James's lawyer finished. Not witch hunts. Every false claim today adds to our countersuit. By noon, Karen's carefully orchestrated takedown had backfired spectacularly. Her inspectors huddled by their van, whispering urgently into phones. The news crew had switched from filming toxic farm allegations to documenting suspicious inspection practices. Then Tom arrived with the final blow, proof that Karen's testing lab had falsified results in 3 other towns. The same lab now trying to condemn Millbrook's farms. Might want to run that story instead, he told the reporters, unless you enjoy publishing retractions. The inspection team packed up quickly after that. Karen remained, face rigid with fury. As she watched her plan crumble, "This isn't over," she hissed at James. "One inspection, one violation, that's all I need. Everyone breaks eventually." "Not everyone," James replied, thinking of Mary's strength during her final days. "Some things are worth fighting for, no matter how long it takes." Karen's eyes narrowed. "You think this is about courage? This is about power. Real power. The kind that doesn't care about your little community uprising." She turned to leave, then paused. "Enjoy your victory. Tomorrow, the State Agricultural Board reviews your organic certification. Let's see how well your Farmers Coalition handles real bureaucracy." The threat hung in the air as her SUV roared away. But James noticed something different in the faces around him. Not fear, but determination. Karen had shown her hand too clearly. Now everyone saw what they were really fighting. "She's right about one thing," Tom said quietly. "Tomorrow will be different, because now we know exactly what we're up against." The inspection had failed, but Karen's words revealed a darker truth. This wasn't just about farms anymore. It was about the very soul of their community, and the real battle was just beginning. Save Millbrook Farms trended by midnight. Linda Chen's son Kevin had captured Karen's inspection team on video. Their clumsy attempts at fabricating violations now viral entertainment. But Karen's digital army struck back hard. Millbrook Farms. "A toxic legacy," screamed sponsored posts across Facebook. Professional-looking infographics showed doctored soil tests. Paid influencers shared tearful stories about getting sick from local produce. None had ever been to Millbrook. "Bot networks," Kevin explained, showing James his laptop. "They're spending serious money to push these lies. Look at the engagement patterns." The attacks got personal. Anonymous accounts dug up Mary's obituary, suggesting James had mismanaged her medical care. Old photos of his farm appeared, digitally altered to show pollution and decay. "They're trying to drown out the truth with noise," Tom observed, watching the feeds. But Karen hadn't counted on small-town solidarity in the digital age. Sarah Mitchell's niece, a college journalism major, started fact-checking every allegation. Local teenagers, raised on these farms, flooded comment sections with real photos and stories. Manuel's daughter, a social media manager in the city, rallied online farming communities nationwide. Then Kevin found the smoking gun, invoices showing Karen's connection to the digital marketing firm running the smear campaign. The same firm that had destroyed reputations in other towns before developer takeovers. "Look at these dates," he pointed out. "They started planning this campaign months before any toxic discoveries. They were building the narrative before. They even had a story." Karen's response was swift. New anonymous posts appeared, claiming Kevin was under investigation for cybercrimes. Linda's grocery store website got hacked, replaced with false health warnings. But the digital war had unexpected consequences. National food safety advocates noticed the pattern. Environmental journalists started connecting dots between Karen's previous toxic farm campaigns and developer land grabs. "We're not the first," James realized, scrolling through similar cases across the country, "but we might be the first to fight back effectively." His phone buzzed. Another attack post. This one showed his property edited to look like a wasteland. But in the comments, something had changed. People were questioning the narrative, sharing links to documented corruption. Truth was finding its way through the noise. "She thinks she can bury us in lies," Tom said, watching local supporters organize online defense teams. But she forgot. Farmers know all about dealing with manure. The hashtag kept spreading. More communities shared their Karen Winters stories. The digital smokescreen began to clear, revealing the real scandal underneath. Late that night, James found himself reading comments from across the country. Farmers facing similar battles, communities fighting developer takeovers, all watching. "Millbrook's resistance with hope. Look at this, Mary," he whispered to her photo. "Your belief in standing together? It's gone viral." His phone lit up with a notification. Karen had just announced an emergency press conference for tomorrow, but now, thanks to their digital defenders, everyone would be watching and questioning every word. The courthouse steps swarmed with reporters as Karen's legal team filed 27 lawsuits simultaneously. Not just against James and the farmers, against everyone who'd spoken out. Linda Chen for defamatory health inspection posts. Sarah Mitchell for abuse of authority in supporting the farms. Even Manuel's daughter for cyber harassment over her social media defense. It's called a SLAP campaign, James's lawyer explained in the crowded diner. Strategic lawsuit against public. Participation, not meant to win, meant to bankrupt defendants with legal fees. The numbers were staggering. Each lawsuit demanded millions in damages. Karen's lawyers, from a prestigious city firm, had drafted hundreds of pages of allegations. Fighting them would cost more than most farms earned in a year. "Look at the firm's client list," Tom said, passing around his tablet. "Riverside Development's parent company, 3 chemical agriculture conglomerates. Companies that buy failed farms and convert them to industrial operations. But Karen had miscalculated again. The lawsuits revealed too much. Banking records subpoenaed for her claims exposed wire transfers from development companies. Real estate. And papers showed her hidden ownership stakes in properties she'd helped condemn. "She's getting sloppy," Sarah observed. "Desperate people make mistakes." The biggest mistake walked into James's farm that afternoon. Karen's former legal clerk, carrying a USB drive. "She made me falsify court documents," the clerk confessed. "Backdate permits, edit inspection reports. I've got copies of everything." The evidence was damning. Email chains showed Karen coordinating with developers years before any toxic discoveries. Draft plans for luxury developments dated before her first community harvest proposal. A complete blueprint for forcing out local farmers. This isn't just about Millbrook, James realized. It's a test case for their whole operation. If they can break us, they'll roll it out everywhere, Tom finished. Replace small farms with corporate agriculture. Control the food supply. Karen's press conference that evening painted a different picture. She stood before cameras, tears flowing, describing a conspiracy against progress. But questions from reporters had changed. Too many inconsistencies, too many patterns exposed. Then the clerk's documents hit social media. Karen lied started trending. National news picked up the story. Journalists began investigating similar cases across the country. James's phone rang. The FBI. "Keep those documents safe," they ordered. "We're moving up our timeline." Karen's response came at midnight. Not more lawsuits, but an offer. "Walk. Away now," the message read. "Keep your farm. All charges dropped. Just stop digging." James stood in his kitchen, reading the offer. Mary's photo watched from the wall. She'd always said truth was like a seed. Once planted, it couldn't be stopped from growing. "She's offering deals to everyone," Tom reported, getting desperate. But the time for deals had passed. Tomorrow, their lawyers would file a countersuit. Not just against Karen, against the entire network of developers and corporate interests behind her. The real battle was about to begin. Not just for Millbrook's farms, but for the future of American agriculture itself. The truth arrived in a plain manila envelope, delivered to James's door by an anonymous courier. Inside, a single USB drive contained thousands of documents from Riverside Development's private servers. The source was clear, Karen's own assistant. "Finally breaking ranks. My God," Tom breathed, scanning the files on James's kitchen laptop. "This isn't just about luxury developments. Millbrook is just one piece of something massive." The documents revealed a nationwide operation. Riverside was a front for AgriCorp International, one of the world's largest industrial farming conglomerates. Their playbook was always the same: find vulnerable farming communities, install political operators like Karen, then systematically destroy local agriculture. "Look at these projection maps," Sarah pointed out. They're planning to take over every independent farming region in the country. Create a monopoly on food production. Karen wasn't just a corrupt politician, she was their star operative. Millbrook was her 15th target, chosen specifically because of its successful organic farms. Each previous victory had followed. The same pattern: environmental scandals, legal harassment, forced bankruptcies. The morning news brought the second bombshell. 3 of Karen's former towns had filed a class action lawsuit. Their local farms, now owned by AgriCorp shell companies, were experiencing mysterious crop failures. The luxury developments had never materialized. It was never about housing, James realized. The developments were just cover. They wanted to destroy independent farming, make communities dependent on corporate agriculture. His phone rang. Linda Chen, voice shaking. They just offered to buy my store. Said if I don't sell, they'll build a supermarket chain next door. They're trying to control the whole food supply chain. The documents exposed how deep it went. Judges on AgriCorp payrolls, health inspectors receiving kickbacks. Even media companies paid to push false narratives about dangerous local farms. But Karen had made a critical error in Millbrook. By targeting James's farm first, the one he'd built for Mary, she'd chosen an opponent with nothing left to lose. Someone who'd inspire others to fight back. Then came the last revelation, hidden in an encrypted email chain. AgriCorp wasn't just planning to control food production. They were developing patented, genetically modified crops that could only grow with their proprietary chemicals. Once local farms were destroyed, communities would have no choice but to accept their products. That's why they targeted organic farms first, Tom said grimly. We're the biggest threat to their plan. Proof people don't need their corporate food system. James stared at Mary's photo. She'd believed in organic farming not just for profit, but because it represented independence, freedom, the very things AgriCorp wanted to destroy. The final document was Karen's own performance review. Millbrook wasn't just another target. It was her test for promotion. If she succeeded here, she'd oversee AgriCorp's entire East Coast acquisition strategy. Sarah's phone buzzed with an urgent update. Karen's called an emergency council session. For tonight. She's trying to push through some kind of agricultural emergency declaration. Give herself power to seize farms immediately. She knows we have the files, Tom realized. She's making her final move. James looked out over his fields, golden in the setting sun. Everything they'd fought for had been leading to this moment. But now they weren't just fighting for Millbrook. They were fighting for the future of American farming itself. Call everyone, he told Tom. Every farmer, every supporter. Tonight we show Karen and AgriCorp exactly what happens when you try to destroy a community's soul. The real war was about to begin. The old schoolhouse was packed an hour before the emergency session. Not just Millbrook residents now. Farmers from 3 states had driven in, filling the parking lot with mud-spattered trucks. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes raised like warning beacons. Karen arrived in a convoy of black SUVs, AgriCorp security teams, flanking her path to the building. Her white suit gleamed under the emergency lights, but her eyes darted nervously at the crowd's size. She's brought private muscle, Sarah whispered to James. Armed security, no permits. She's expecting trouble. Inside, Karen's remaining allies occupied the front rows. Developers, corrupt officials, paid supporters. But they were islands in a sea of farmers and townspeople. The room hummed with tension. Last chance, Karen's lawyer approached James before the session. AgriCorp's offering triple market value for your farm. Walk away wealthy or lose everything fighting us. James thought of Mary, of her dream for the farm. Some things weren't for sale. The session began with Karen's prepared speech. Due to ongoing environmental concerns and public safety threats, she declared, I am invoking Emergency Order 457, granting the Council direct control over all agricultural operations in Millbrook County. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Her security teams moved to block the exits. Furthermore, she continued, given the serious nature of soil contamination found— You mean the fake tests? Tom stood, holding up a laptop. The ones your AgriCorp labs falsified. Maybe we should show everyone the real data. Karen's facade cracked. This is a closed council session. Public comment is not— It's an open meeting, Sarah countered. By law, same law that requires us to record everything you say. She pointed to dozens of phones live streaming the session. James rose next, documents in hand. Before we continue, the FBI asked me to deliver something. He approached the council platform. Federal warrants. For you, your security team, and every AgriCorp executive involved in this operation. Color drained from Karen's face. Through the windows, red and blue lights appeared. Not local deputies, but federal agents. This meeting is adjourned, Karen shouted, but her voice held panic now. Her security team moved toward her, hands reaching under jackets. I wouldn't, Sarah warned. Several farmers in the crowd stood, badges appearing. FBI plants, waiting. For exactly this moment, Karen looked desperately for escape routes, finding none. The crowd she'd planned to intimidate had become a trap. You think this stops with me? She snarled at James. AgriCorp owns judges, politicians, entire state governments. You'll never— Already trending, Kevin Chen called out, holding up his phone. AgriCorp conspiracy. Your internal files just went viral. Every newspaper in the country is running the story. Tom stepped forward. See, Karen, you made a mistake. Thought you could bully farmers into submission. But you forgot something. Important. He gestured to the united crowd. We know how to survive hard times, know how to stand together when it matters. The FBI moved in as Karen's security team surrendered. But her final glare at James carried a clear warning. This wasn't over. AgriCorp wouldn't give up their plans easily. Outside, more vehicles arrived. Supporters from other towns, media trucks, even state officials, sensing which way the wind was blowing. They'll send someone else, Tom said quietly. Try again with another town. James watched Karen being led to a federal vehicle. Maybe. But now everyone knows their playbook. And next time, he looked at the united crowd of farmers and supporters. Next time we'll be ready. The battle for Millbrook was ending, but the war for America's agricultural soul was just beginning. Dawn broke over Millbrook to find the town transformed. Farmers had parked their tractors in a defensive ring around the courthouse. Hand-painted signs declared, "Save our farms" and "Stop AgriCorp." News helicopters circled overhead, capturing the scene as hundreds of supporters poured in from surrounding counties. AgriCorp's lawyers are flying in from Chicago, Tom reported, checking his phone. Their PR team's already trying to spin this as radical farmers opposing progress. But this time, the corporate playbook wasn't working. Kevin Chen's social media campaign had gone national. Stand with Millbrook trended as similar communities shared their stories of developer harassment and corporate takeovers. Inside the diner, now serving as resistance headquarters, James spread out documents on the counter. Karen's arrest was just the beginning. AgriCorp had deeper roots in local government than anyone suspected. 3 council members are on their payroll, Sarah revealed, reviewing the seized files. They're pushing for an emergency vote to validate Karen's orders before the FBI can stop them. Linda Chen burst in, clutching a letter. They're threatening to call our loans, every business that supported the farmers. They're trying to bankrupt us all at once. But AgriCorp had underestimated small-town solidarity. Local banks, seeing the evidence of corruption, refused to cooperate. Neighboring communities offered emergency credit lines. Farmers from across the state volunteered to help work Millbrook's fields if needed. Look outside, Tom said softly. The street had filled with people, not just farmers now, teachers, shop owners, factory workers. Families who'd lived in Millbrook for generations stood alongside recent arrivals, all united against corporate Tyranny. Manuel's daughter projected AgriCorp's leaked files onto the courthouse wall. Decades of corrupt deals, environmental violations, and destroyed communities played in a damning slideshow. Every attempt to discredit the evidence only brought more attention. "They're calling an emergency shareholders meeting," Kevin announced, "monitoring corporate communications. AgriCorp's stock is falling. Investors are demanding answers." James walked through the crowd, remembering Mary's words about community strength. She would have loved this. People standing together, fighting for something bigger than themselves. A fleet of black SUVs appeared at the town limits. AgriCorp's crisis team, coming to salvage their crumbling scheme. But they found no weakness to exploit, no division to widen. Millbrook had become something they didn't understand, a community united in purpose. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Tom said, watching the corporate lawyers retreat, "they'll never look at small towns the same way again." As sunset painted the sky, James returned to his farm. The wheat fields glowed golden, just as they had the day Karen first threatened them. But everything else had changed. "We did it, Mary," he whispered to the evening air. "We showed them what people can do when they stand together. Tomorrow would bring the final battle, AgriCorp's lawyers versus a small town's determination." But tonight, watching supporters set up tents in his fields, James knew they'd already won the most important victory. They'd proven that community, once awakened, was stronger than any corporation. City Hall's chambers had never seen anything like this. AgriCorp's legal team filled one side, 12 lawyers in expensive suits, armed with injunctions and court orders. Facing them sat James, Tom, and Sarah, backed by hundreds of community members. Every seat was filled, every wall lined with observers, the overflow crowd watching via video feeds in the parking lot. "We move for immediate implementation of Emergency Order 457, AgriCorp's lead attorney began. "Our evidence clearly shows—" "Fraudulent evidence," James's lawyer interrupted, dropping a thick folder on the table. "FBI forensics confirms every soil test, every inspection report was falsified. By your labs, on your orders." The corporate team shifted uncomfortably as federal agents moved through the room, serving more warrants. Karen's confession had opened floodgates of evidence. "These allegations are baseless," another AgriCorp lawyer declared. "Our company's reputation—" "Your company's reputation?" Linda Chen stood up. "Tell that to my suppliers, the ones you threatened. Tell it to the banks you pressured. Tell it to every community you've destroyed." The chamber doors burst open. 3 state senators entered, followed by news crews. Not AgriCorp's usual allies. These were members of the Agricultural Oversight Committee, drawn by the viral evidence of corruption. "This hearing is now a formal state investigation," the lead senator announced. "AgriCorp's agricultural licenses are suspended pending review." Panic rippled through the corporate ranks. Their carefully constructed plan was unraveling on national television. "We have contracts," their lawyer insisted. "Legal obligations. The economic impact of this suspension." "The economic impact?" Tom's voice cut through the chamber. "Let's talk about impact. Show them, Kevin." Linda's son projected his presentation onto the wall. Decades of AgriCorp's true impact played out in graphs and images. Failed farms, poisoned soil, communities left in ruins after their development schemes. "This isn't just about Millbrook," James addressed the senators. "It's about every small farm in America. Every community facing corporate takeover. Someone had to take a stand." The evidence was overwhelming. Even AgriCorp's lawyers fell silent as their own internal documents exposed the truth. Emergency Order 457 wasn't about public safety. It was part of a calculated plan to seize control of America's food supply. In light of this evidence, the senior senator began, but commotion outside interrupted him. AgriCorp's CEO had arrived, flanked by private security. He strode into the chamber, radiating corporate authority, ready to crush small-town resistance with big city power. "This stops now," he demanded. "Do you have any idea what you're costing our shareholders? Do you have any idea what you've cost our communities?" James stood facing him. "This isn't about money. It's about something you don't understand. Something Karen didn't understand. You can't buy community. You can't crush it with lawyers, and you can't steal it with corrupt politics." The CEO's mask cracked. "We'll bury this town in litigation. Tie you up in courts for years." "No," the senator cut in. "You won't." She held up a federal order. "The Justice Department is freezing AgriCorp's assets. All operations suspended pending criminal investigation." The corporate team collapsed into chaos. Their CEO, seeing his empire crumbling, made one last threat. "This isn't over. There will always be other companies, other ways." "You're right," James replied calmly. "It's not over, because now every farming community in America knows your playbook, knows how to fight back. What happened here in Millbrook, it's just the beginning." The chamber erupted in cheers as federal agents led the CEO away. Outside, the crowd's roar shook the building. David had beaten Goliath, and the whole world was watching. Sunset painted Millbrook's fields gold as farmers returned to their land, this time not in defense, but in celebration. News crews captured the moment James unlocked his gate, removing the last of the warning signs Karen had posted. Behind him, a convoy of trucks stretched down the road, supporters who'd come to help harvest the crops that had nearly been lost. "First time I've seen a harvest make national news," Tom remarked, watching reporters interview locals. The story had exploded. Beyond their small town, Millbrook victory trended worldwide as communities shared their own stories of resistance against corporate takeovers. Linda Chen's grocery store had become Resistance headquarters, its walls covered with messages from supporters across the country. Her suppliers had not only returned, but offered exclusive contracts. Locally grown produce was now a symbol of community strength. AgriCorp's stock dropped 60% today, Kevin reported, showing James his laptop. 3 board members resigned. Their entire community acquisition program is being investigated by federal authorities. Sarah Mitchell arrived with more news. States reviewing every case Karen handled. 4 other towns have already filed to overturn her development projects. This is triggering investigations nationwide. But the real victory wasn't in courtrooms or corporate boardrooms. It was in the fields, where farmers worked together under the evening sky. Manuel's family had prepared a feast, spread across tables in James's barn. Community members who'd stood together in crisis now celebrated together in triumph. "Mary would have loved this," Tom said softly, watching children play between the tractors. "She always said a farm was more than just land." James nodded, feeling her presence in every acre he'd fought to protect. The wheat swayed in the breeze, healthy and strong, just like the community that had saved it. The FBI had found Karen's complete files, decades of corporate schemes exposed, showing how AgriCorp had systematically targeted and destroyed farming communities. But Millbrook had changed the game. They'd created a blueprint for resistance that was already spreading. "Got calls from 6 other towns today," Tom announced. "They want to know how we did it, how we stood up to corporate power and won." "Simple," James replied. "We remembered what Mary always said. Real strength grows from the ground up." As night fell, farmhouse lights twinkled across the valley like stars. Not just survivors now, but beacons of hope for others fighting similar battles. Millbrook had become more than a town. It was proof that community could triumph over corporate greed. The evening's peace was broken by approaching sirens, but these weren't police cars. Fire trucks and ambulances paraded down the road, lights flashing in celebration. The same first responders who'd stood with the farmers now led their victory parade. James walked his fields one last time that night, remembering the day Karen had first threatened his land. She'd thought she was targeting just another farmer, someone who would break under corporate pressure. Instead, she'd awakened something more powerful than any corporation, the unshakable strength of a community united in purpose. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Other companies would try different tactics, but something fundamental had changed. David had beaten Goliath, and the whole world had watched. The age of corporate bullies quietly devouring small towns was over. Mary's dream hadn't just survived, it had grown into something bigger than anyone imagined. A movement born in Millbrook's fields was spreading across the country, carried like seeds on the wind, taking root wherever communities faced similar threats. "We did it, love," James whispered to the stars. "We showed them what real farming's about. Not just growing crops, growing hope." 1 year after Karen's arrest, Millbrook's autumn harvest drew visitors from across the country. Farmers facing similar battles came to learn, while documentary crews captured what became known as the Millbrook Method, communities standing together against corporate takeovers. James's farm had transformed into an unofficial training center. Every weekend, delegations from threatened towns arrived to learn organizing tactics, legal strategies, and digital defense techniques. Kevin Chen's social media workshop was always packed, while Sarah Mitchell taught communities how to document corporate harassment effectively. The old council chamber where Karen once ruled now hosted a farmers' cooperative. Linda Chen's grocery store had expanded into a regional hub for organic produce. Even Manuel had started his own farming program, teaching immigrant families sustainable agriculture. "Different kind of harvest," Tom observed, watching James mentor a group from Nebraska. Not just crops anymore, growing resistance. The changes spread beyond Millbrook. AgriCorp's collapse triggered federal investigations into corporate land grabs nationwide. New laws, dubbed the Millbrook Protections, gave communities tools to fight predatory development. Karen's guilty plea had exposed corruption networks in 12 states, but the real victory grew in Millbrook's fields. James stood at Mary's favorite spot, watching the evening sun paint his wheat gold. The land wasn't just surviving, it was thriving, nourishing both crops and community. "You were right, love," he whispered to Mary's memory. "Sometimes the strongest growth comes after the hardest fights." Across the valley, lights winked on in farmhouses that had nearly been lost. Each one represented not just a family protecting their legacy, but a beacon of hope for others, fighting similar battles. Millbrook had shown that even the smallest communities could stand against corporate giants and win. The harvest moon rose over fields that would remain farms forever, protected now by the very thing Karen had tried to destroy, the unbreakable bonds of community.